He was a Navy SEAL who came to the mountains to forget war and bury his ghosts. But one night, in a storm that could swallow the world, he found 2 lives buried beneath the snow. A wounded police officer and her loyal K-9, bound and left to die. Their breaths were shallow, their time running out, and their salvation rested in the hands of the one man who had sworn never to fight again. But fate doesn't ask. It drags you back to the battlefield, even when that battlefield is covered in snow. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more. The night over Silver Pine Mountains was a white void, the kind that swallowed sound and light, until only the heartbeat in one's ears reminded them they were alive. Snow came in relentless sheets, slanting sideways through the wind, coating the forest like glass dust. Inside a lonely log cabin half buried under drifts, Ethan Cole sat near the fire, a man carved from silence. He was 36, tall and broad-shouldered, with a body still carrying the discipline of a soldier, but eyes that had seen too much war to ever rest. His hair, once dark as wet bark, had grown unevenly, brushed back from a sharp, square face marked by faint scars and the shadow of perpetual stubble. His hands were calloused, steady, hands that had saved lives and taken them in the same breath. He had been a Navy SEAL once, until Kandahar took his best friend and the last piece of his faith in missions that never ended. Since then, peace had become not a place, but a punishment he tried to survive. The wind howled against the cabin walls like a ghost demanding entry. Ethan glanced at the clock above the stove, past midnight, and sighed. The generator outside had begun to sputter an hour ago, its hum turning irregular. He pulled on a thick parka, the fabric faded at the seams, and slipped his flashlight from the nail by the door. The moment he stepped outside, the storm bit into his skin like a living thing. Snowflakes stung his face, and each breath was a shard of ice. He trudged through knee-deep snow, boots crunching in rhythm with the distant groan of the trees bending under the storm's weight. He checked the generator first. Frozen valves, a line of frost creeping over the gauge. But then something caught his eye. A glint, a faint metallic shimmer where there should have been only white. Instinct overrode reason. Ethan froze, scanning the field beyond the pines. The light wasn't steady. It flickered, vanished, then flashed again when his flashlight beam crossed the slope near the tree line. Something was there. He moved toward it, the soldier in him awakening like an old ghost. The snow came higher, up to his thighs, and every few steps he had to stop, recalibrate, listen. Beneath the roar of the wind, a sound surfaced, a muffled, broken whine, too human to be the wind, too faint to be anything alive for long. His pulse kicked up. He adjusted his beam downward. That was when he saw it. A small mound of snow rising unnaturally from the even field, and from it a glint of something silver, a badge perhaps. He dropped to his knees, brushed the snow away with gloved hands, and what stared back at him froze the breath in his throat. A woman's face, pale as the moonlight, her lashes rimmed with ice, her lips slightly parted in the shallow rhythm of someone trapped between life and death. Only part of her head and shoulder were visible. The rest of her body lay buried beneath hard-packed snow. Beside her, almost fused to her form, was a dog. A German shepherd. Large and muscular, its fur coated in ice, muzzle caked with frost. Its body was curved protectively toward her, as if shielding her from the cold that had nearly claimed them both. Jesus, Ethan muttered under his breath, scraping faster now. The dog gave a faint twitch. Alive. That one movement hit him harder than any explosion he'd known. He tore off his outer gloves, fingers burning from the cold, and began clearing snow with frantic precision. every layer revealed more of the woman's uniform. Dark tactical fabric, a torn police patch on her sleeve, the holster at her hip frozen stiff. She was a cop. He didn't know from where, didn't care. She was human, and breathing, barely. Come on, he whispered, as if willing her pulse to listen. He slid his arms under her shoulders, grunting at the weight of her soaked clothes, and freed her from the icy grave. Then he lifted the dog, 80 pounds of dead weight, and staggered back toward the cabin, the wind trying to pull them from his arms. Inside, heat hit like a wave. Ethan laid them both near the fire. The dog, even half-conscious, gave a hoarse growl as he leaned close to the woman. "Easy, boy," Ethan said quietly, voice low but firm, a tone born from years of commanding chaos. "I'm helping her." The animal stilled, nose twitching at his scent before its eyes fluttered shut again. Ethan stripped the woman's outer layers, utility jacket, vest, gloves, cutting through frozen fabric with his knife when needed. Her skin beneath was ghostly, veins showing faint blue beneath the frostbite. Her hair, long and dark, was tangled with ice, clinging to her neck and cheek. There was a bruise on her temple, ugly and purple, the kind made by the butt of a gun or a violent fall. Her name tag was cracked, but enough remained to read it. L. Hayes. He pressed his fingers to her throat. Faint pulse, thin, erratic, but there. He wrapped her in blankets, tucking them tight, and rubbed warmth into her arms and hands. He remembered the drills. Never heat too fast, never shock the heart. The steps came automatically, muscle memory overriding thought. He set water to boil, poured it into bottles, and lined them under the blankets along her body. For hours, the cabin was filled with only 3 sounds: the fire's slow breath, the storm clawing at the windows, and the ticking of the old clock. Ethan moved between them, checking vitals, adjusting the fire. The dog stirred once, letting out a weak whimper. Ethan knelt beside it. "Shadow," he said softly, reading the tag on its collar. "You did good, Shadow." He cleaned the crusted blood from the dog's fur with warm cloths. There was a shallow cut along its flank, the kind that bled a lot but missed anything vital. Shadow's breathing steadied as Ethan worked, a low sigh escaping as if the animal recognized safety. When the woman's breathing deepened, Ethan finally sat back, exhaustion heavy in his bones. Looked at her. Really looked. She was maybe 30, with sharp features softened by cold. High cheekbones, strong jawline, lips chapped but full. Even unconscious, there was defiance in the set of her brow, the kind that belonged to someone who'd stood her ground too many times. She looked like the kind of person who fought for others until she forgot herself. He poured whiskey into a mug, letting it burn down his throat before speaking quietly to the fire. "You couldn't just stay out of it, could you?" he said to no one, his voice roughened by guilt. "Same as me." Memories came in flashes. The screams in the desert, the radio static, his teammate's hand slipping from his grasp. Every time he closed his eyes, that moment replayed. His failure, his penance. He had come here to disappear, to live where nothing asked for saving. And yet, the universe had buried 2 souls outside his door like a test he never wanted to take. Hours passed. The wind eased, turning from a scream to a whisper. The woman stirred, her head shifting slightly on the pillow. Ethan leaned forward. Her eyes fluttered open, ice blue, unfocused, frightened. She tried to move, panic flickering as she saw him. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "Easy," he murmured, keeping his hands visible. "You're safe. You were buried in the storm. I brought you here." She blinked, trying to focus on his face, then on the room. "Shadow!" she rasped, voice cracking. "He's here," Ethan said. "He's alive." The faintest relief crossed her expression, Her lashes trembled, and she slipped back into unconsciousness. Ethan sat there a long moment, listening to the steadying rhythm of her breath, the softer snore of the dog. Then he stood, walked to the window, and stared at the storm easing over the pines. Somewhere out there, someone had left them to die. He didn't know why, but he knew one thing with chilling clarity. Whoever they were, they'd come looking. He turned from the window, his silhouette framed by the flicker of firelight. The soldier in him, the one he'd buried with his friend, was awake again. And this time, the war had found him in his own home. Morning came to Silver Pine as a dim gray light filtering through the fogged cabin window. The storm had lost its fury, but the world outside still lay under a thick, frozen shroud. Inside, the fire crackled low, its orange glow painting the room in slow-moving light and shadow. Ethan Cole stirred from the wooden chair beside the couch where the woman lay. He hadn't slept, just sat there, half alert, the way soldiers do when they know safety is only an illusion. The lines under his eyes were deeper now, his jaw tight from hours of waiting for her to breathe evenly. He had placed the kettle on the stove more times than he could count, keeping the air humid enough for her to breathe, for her lungs to thaw back from the edge of death. The woman, Lara Hayes, moved slightly under the blankets. Her skin, which the night before had been almost gray, had regained a fragile trace of color. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying her face in the quiet. Her features were strong, angular cheeks, a small scar near her right eyebrow, lips dry but determined even in sleep. The kind of face that belonged to someone who didn't quit easily. He recognized it because he used to see it in the mirror before the war took the mirror away. Shadow, the German shepherd, lay curled at her feet. His breathing was slow but steady now, his tail twitching once in some dog's dream. The firelight shimmered along his sable coat, revealing the fresh bandages wrapped carefully around his side. Ethan reached down to check them, whispering softly, "You're a tough one." The dog opened one amber eye, studied the man for a heartbeat, and then closed it again. Ethan couldn't help but smile, faint but real, the first in months. A soft gasp brought his gaze back to the couch. Lara's eyes opened, blue-gray, unfocused, glinting with confusion and fear. She tried to sit up but winced sharply as pain shot through her shoulder. Ethan lifted a hand calmly. "Easy. You're safe. You were buried in the snow last night. You need to stay still." Her eyes darted across the room, taking in the rough-hewn log walls, the single window, the faint smell of pine smoke. Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, cracked from cold and dehydration. "My cabin, Silver Pine Ridge. You're lucky I found you," Ethan said simply, rising to pour her a cup of warm water. His voice carried that deep steadiness that soldiers never lose, even when they've stopped taking orders. "Drink slowly." She hesitated, watching him warily as he handed her the cup. He looked big, too big for the quiet space he moved in. His parka hung open, revealing a gray thermal shirt stretched over his broad frame, sleeves rolled up to his forearms. The muscles in his arms were solid but not showy, his movements economical, controlled. There was something in the way he stood, a balance of caution and readiness. The way wolves stand when they know every sound in the forest belongs to them. Lara took a sip, her hands trembling slightly. The heat burned her cracked lips, but she welcomed it. "You're military," she said, more an observation than a question. "Was," Ethan replied. "Navy SEAL, a long time ago." She nodded slowly, her gaze softening. "Lara Hayes. Detective, Silver Ridge Police Department." She swallowed. And he's Shadow. She glanced at the sleeping dog, emotion flickering briefly behind her eyes. We were tracking a shipment of fentanyl across the ridge. It was supposed to be routine surveillance until it wasn't. Ethan said nothing. He'd learned that silence, used right, was kinder than interrogation. They knew we were coming, she continued after a moment, her voice gaining strength. We were ambushed before sundown. My partner didn't make it. I remember gunfire, a truck engine, and someone yelling to leave the cop and her mutt. After that, just cold. She rubbed her temple, wincing as the bruise pulsed beneath her skin. Ethan watched her carefully, recognizing that hollow stare. Shock tempered by duty, grief trying to disguise itself as composure. They left you for dead, he said quietly. Her eyes met his, sharp now. And they almost got what they wanted. He nodded. Almost. Shadow stirred, lifting his head at the sound of her voice. His ears perked, and when he saw her awake, he whined softly and tried to stand. Lara's entire body softened. Hey, boy, she whispered, tears blurring her vision. You made it. The dog limped toward her, tail sweeping the floor weakly. Ethan moved aside as Lara cupped Shadow's face in both hands, pressing her forehead to his. Good boy. You stayed with me. The sight tightened something in Ethan's chest. It reminded him of his old K-9 partner, Ranger, back in Afghanistan. A bond beyond words, the kind only war could forge. He turned away, pretending to check the fire. Lara finally looked around again, taking in the small details of her surroundings. A rifle mounted above the doorway, maps pinned to the wall, boots lined neatly under a coat rack. You live out here alone? Ethan shrugged. Most people stay away from snow this deep. It stays quiet that way. She studied him for a moment, then said softly, You're running from something. He met her gaze without flinching. Aren't we all? The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was a fragile truce between two people who had both outlived something they shouldn't have. Ethan turned back to the stove. You need food. I've got soup. Nothing fancy, but it'll do. He ladled steaming broth into a tin bowl and handed it to her with a spoon. Lara hesitated again, perhaps unused to being cared for. Her fingers brushed his briefly when she took it, and she noticed how warm his skin was, how steady his grip remained. She ate slowly, between breaths that still trembled. When the color returned to her cheeks, Ethan asked, You said your partner didn't make it. Do you know who hit you? Lara's expression darkened. I didn't see faces, but the trucks had state forestry emblems, fake ones, professional setup. Whoever they are, they had intel. Our route, timing, everything. Her voice lowered. That means someone inside the department is feeding them. Ethan frowned. You think there's a leak? I know there is, she said quietly, staring into the fire. And if they find out I'm alive? She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Ethan took in the weight of her words. He had come here to outrun ghosts, not take on new ones. But looking at her, half broken, still fighting, he felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. You'll stay here until the weather clears, he said finally. Then we'll figure out who did this. Lara blinked, surprised by the word, we. You don't even know me. Ethan gave a small, tired smile. I didn't know the people I saved overseas either. Didn't matter then. Doesn't now. She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. All right. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines, gentler now but still carrying the cold. Inside, warmth had begun to return, not just to the air but to something in both of them. Shadow settled again at Lara's side, sighing as the firelight danced across his coat. Lara leaned back into the couch, her body finally relaxing, exhaustion claiming her. Ethan cleaned up quietly, then sat across from her, watching the snow drift past the window. The world was still frozen, silent, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. He didn't know who had ambushed her, or why fate had dropped her and the dog outside his cabin. But he knew this much. The mountains had given him something the war never could. A second chance to protect someone who deserved it. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows up the wall. Lara's breathing steadied, soft and rhythmic. Ethan stayed awake, listening, a silent guardian against the cold creeping beyond the walls. Somewhere far below, the first ray of dawn broke through the clouds, pale and thin, but real. By the third morning, the world outside had settled into an eerie calm. The storm had gone, leaving the mountains of silver pine draped in a silence so thick that every sound seemed amplified. The creak of trees heavy with ice, the soft groan of snow shifting beneath its own weight. The air smelled of pine and iron, sharp and clean. Ethan Cole stood by the cabin door, axe in hand, his breath steaming into the cold light. He had been chopping wood for an hour, rhythm steady, body moving with the precision of a man who found peace only in repetition. But when he paused to gather the split logs, something broke the stillness. A set of tire tracks leading from the tree line toward the cabin, half buried beneath the new snow. Ethan's brow furrowed. No one came this high up. The only access road was a forgotten forestry trail, impassable for months in winter. He crouched down, brushing the snow away with a gloved hand. The pattern was fresh. Deep grooves, narrow tread. 2 vehicles, maybe trucks. They'd come close, stopped for a while, then turned back. His gut tightened. Whoever had left Lara and the dog out there had come near his cabin afterward. That meant they knew where she had ended up. He rose silently and scanned the ridge. Nothing moved, only the stillness of the woods, white and endless. Shadow padded out from behind the cabin, his nose twitching, fur catching the light like living smoke. The shepherd's body had regained strength, though he still limped slightly on his left leg. His ears flicked toward the tracks, and he gave a low growl that rumbled from deep in his chest. Ethan knelt beside him, voice low. "You smell it too, don't you, boy?" Shadow's nose pressed to the ground, following the scent, tail stiff and focused. He moved toward the slope behind the cabin, sniffing the wind, then stopped near a mound of ice and started digging furiously. Snow sprayed in all directions, paws working with renewed purpose. Ethan dropped the axe, grabbed a small shovel, and joined in. Within minutes, they uncovered a patch of torn canvas, black nylon, half frozen into the earth. He pried it loose and found a small waterproof bag sealed with duct tape. Inside was a cracked satellite phone, its screen shattered, and a folded map, stained with something dark. Oil or blood. Ethan turned it over in his hands, frowning. The map was of Silver Ridge County, old and weathered, marked with several black X's. One of them sat directly over a place labeled Hollow Creek Mine, long since abandoned after a collapse 20 years ago. He brought the findings inside. Lara Hayes sat at the table, dressed in one of Ethan's flannel shirts and thermal pants. Her hair was still damp from washing, tied back loosely. The bruising around her temple had turned from purple to a dull yellow, and her movements, though careful, carried the stiffness of someone forcing herself to heal faster than her body allowed. She looked up when he entered. Eyes alert, the instincts of a cop still alive beneath exhaustion. "What did you find?" she asked, noticing the dirt on his gloves. Ethan laid the items on the table. "Tracks outside, 2 trucks. Fresh. They stopped near the tree line. Shadow dug this up." She unfolded the map, eyes narrowing. Hollow Creek, she murmured. I've heard that name before. She traced the markings with her finger, connecting the X's like fragments of memory. It used to be an old copper mine, closed after a cave-in killed 6 workers. About a year ago, a few hikers reported seeing lights out there at night. Trucks, generators, movement. The department brushed it off as kids drinking. But I don't think it was kids. Ethan crossed his arms. You think it's connected to whoever hit you? Lara nodded. It's the perfect cover. Deep in the woods, no access roads anyone cares about. If I'm right, it's a distribution site for the drug network we've been tracking. Shadow nudged her elbow, and she smiled faintly, scratching behind his ear. They must have realized I got too close. Only a few people knew where my team was heading that night. My partner and I didn't file the final coordinates publicly. That means... Her voice trailed off, eyes darkening. Someone in my department leaked our route. Ethan watched her face. Beneath the calm surface, anger simmered. A quiet, contained fury she tried to hide behind her professional tone. You think you know who? Lara shook her head. No, but it has to be someone high up, someone who could override dispatch logs. The kettle whistled softly. Ethan poured 2 mugs of coffee, sliding one to her. If that's true, you can't go back down there. Not yet. If there's a leak, they'll know you survived. She took the cup, but didn't drink, staring into the steam. I can't just hide either. If they're using that mine, they're still moving product. People are dying because of what they're smuggling. You can't save anyone dead, he replied flatly. Their eyes met, hers sharp and defiant, his calm and unyielding. It was a silent standoff between duty and caution. Eventually, she sighed and sat back. Fine, we'll wait until the weather clears. Then I'll go. With or without backup. Ethan didn't argue. He'd seen that kind of resolve before. Men and women who'd decided dying for the mission was better than living with unfinished business. He also knew how many graves that kind of thinking filled. Later, when Lara dozed on the couch and the fire burned low, Ethan stepped outside again, scanning the horizon. The snow reflected moonlight so bright it almost hurt his eyes. He heard nothing but the faint creak of branches. Yet the unease wouldn't leave him. He was still standing there when a shape appeared at the edge of the clearing. A figure on a snowmobile, moving slowly, headlamp flicking once like a signal before cutting off. Ethan ducked behind the stacked logs, raising his binoculars. The rider dismounted, a silhouette against the trees. From this distance, Ethan could make out broad shoulders beneath a forest-green parka and a hood trimmed with fur. The stranger moved with deliberate precision, pausing now and then to study the tracks by the cabin, then crouched to the ground. Whoever it was, they were skilled, too controlled to be a lost traveler. Ethan's grip tightened on the binoculars. He crept back inside, locking the door silently. Lara stirred as he entered. "What is it?" she whispered. "Someone's out there," he said quietly, moving to the rifle above the doorway. Not close, but watching. Her eyes hardened instantly. "One of them?" Could be. Could be a ranger checking storm damage. Either way, I'm not taking chances." They kept the lights low, waiting. After several tense minutes, Shadow's ears twitched, and he gave a low, alert bark. Ethan peered through the small window again. The snowmobile was gone, tracks leading back toward the forest. But at the edge of the clearing, half buried in snow, something glinted. A small metallic object. The next morning, he retrieved it. A spent 9mm shell casing, clean and unweathered. Someone had been there recently, close enough to fire a shot. Yet no bullet holes marked the cabin or the trees. It wasn't an attack. It was a warning. Ethan turned the casing over in his fingers and felt that old familiar chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He looked toward the pines, jaw tightening. "They know we're here," he said under his breath. Behind him, Lara stood in the doorway, her flannel shirt loose around her shoulders, eyes narrowed against the wind. "Then we'd better find them first," she said. Ethan met her gaze and gave a small nod. In that moment, an unspoken alliance formed. Two strangers bound by a threat neither had chosen but both refused to run from. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the snow concealed secrets older and darker than either of them yet understood. But now, the hunt had begun. The night had a sharpness to it, the kind that made even the trees hold their breath. Outside, the snow glowed faintly under a half moon, the forest stretching endlessly in silver and shadow. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to embers. Lara Hayes was asleep on the couch, her arm draped protectively over Shadow, whose ears twitched at every distant creak. Ethan Cole sat near the window, cleaning his rifle by candlelight, every movement precise and soundless. Years of habit kept him awake long after exhaustion demanded rest. Something in the air felt wrong. Too still, too watchful. Then it came. A faint crunch, like a foot pressing into snow outside. Then another, softer, almost tentative. Ethan froze mid-motion, his hand hovering above the rifle. He extinguished the candle with 2 fingers, plunging the room into darkness. The fire's glow died into dim coals. He moved to Lara, touched her shoulder gently. Her eyes opened instantly. Trained reflex. He raised a finger to his lips, then pointed upward. The sound came again, on the roof this time. Snow shifted under weight. Someone was moving quietly, carefully. Lara slid from the couch, reaching for her Glock. Her bruised temple caught a sliver of light from the window, turning her expression into something cold and focused. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. 3 of them, maybe 4. They're testing the place. Shadow gave a low growl, but stayed low beside Lara, hackles rising, muscles taut. Ethan moved toward the door, barefoot now, steps noiseless on the wood. The X-Seal inside him took command, the part of him that measured sound, distance, timing without conscious thought. He peeked through the slit between curtains. Shapes moved in the dark. 3 men in heavy coats, their silhouettes black against the snow. Each wore night vision goggles, the faint green glow betraying them. One held a suppressed SMG, another a short hunting rifle. The third was bigger, broader, moving with the casual confidence of a man used to violence. Ethan signaled Lara silently, mouthing the word, window. She nodded, moving toward the opposite wall. The men outside whispered. Their leader, the large one, removed his goggles briefly, revealing a face coarse and scarred from old fights. His name, as Ethan would later learn, was Victor Dane, a mercenary who'd once served as a private enforcer for the Riker operation. Victor was in his 40s, barrel-chested, with cropped blonde hair and a beard that looked carved from steel shavings. His eyes were pale gray, eyes that never flinched. He had fought in Eastern Europe, lost half his unit to betrayal, and since then, trust was a luxury he didn't afford anyone. Tonight, he wasn't here to talk. He was here to clean up a mess. Victor raised a hand, signaling the others. Check the cabin, quietly, no witnesses. His voice was low, cold, carrying an accent shaped by years of war and whiskey. Ethan waited until the first man stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked. A mistake. In the next heartbeat, Ethan swung the door open, grabbing the man by his coat and dragging him inside. The silenced pistol in the intruder's hand fired once into the floor as Ethan twisted his arm and slammed his head against the doorframe. The man dropped instantly, unconscious before his body hit the floor. The second intruder spun toward the sound, raising his rifle. Lara appeared at the window, her Glock already aligned. One sharp shot, clean, efficient, caught the man's leg. He fell backward into the snow with a muffled cry. The third, Victor, reacted instantly, rolling behind a tree. He fired 2 suppressed rounds through the open doorway, splinters bursting off the frame. Ethan ducked, grabbed his sidearm, and returned fire. 2 precise shots that forced Victor to cover. Shadow barked, teeth bared, body low to the ground. Lara moved beside Ethan, voice steady. 2 down, 1 left. Ethan's expression didn't change. Not just 1. That one's trained. Outside, Victor reloaded calmly, glancing at the blood trailing from his wounded man. He spoke to him in a flat tone. Shut up or bleed faster. Then he called out toward the cabin. Cole, I know you're in there. Riker said you'd make it hard, but you're just 1 man. Ethan froze. The sound of his own name from a stranger's mouth sent a chill deeper than the snow ever could. How the hell does he know me? He muttered. Lara's eyes widened. Riker, the police chief. He's behind this. Ethan's jaw tightened. Seems your department's rot goes deeper than I thought. There was a pause, then silence again. Victor's boots crunched slowly closer. Ethan positioned himself beside the door, breathing steady, counting seconds. When the shadow crossed the threshold, Ethan moved. He slammed the butt of his rifle into Victor's wrist, sending the gun skidding across the floor. They collided hard, the impact shaking dust from the ceiling. The fight was brutal and silent. Victor was a brawler, all brute strength and short strikes. Ethan fought like a soldier, precise, economical. The 2 men grappled, their breath loud in the dark. Victor caught Ethan's shoulder with a heavy punch, but Ethan countered with an elbow to the jaw that made the mercenary stagger. Lara aimed her Glock, but couldn't fire without risking Ethan. Victor lunged, grabbing a kitchen knife from the counter, slashing wildly. The blade grazed Ethan's arm, a shallow cut, but he used the motion to twist Victor's arm back, locking it until the knife dropped. He slammed him against the wall, forearm pressed to his throat. Who sent you? Ethan hissed. Victor laughed hoarsely, blood on his teeth. You already know. Tom Riker. He owns this county. Why Lara? She found the mine, Victor rasped, smiling through the choke. You 2 just stepped into the wrong storm. Ethan tightened his grip until Victor's eyes rolled. Tell Riker he's next. Then he hit him once, clean and final. Victor collapsed, unconscious but alive. Lara holstered her Glock, breathing hard. He said Riker's name himself. Ethan nodded, wiping blood from his forearm. And that means we're done waiting. They dragged the injured men inside, binding their wrists with paracord Ethan found in his gear. The wounded one on the floor whimpered softly. Lara knelt beside him. You want to live? She asked coldly. The man nodded frantically. Then talk, he stammered, voice shaking. Riker runs the shipments. The mine's the base. Victor's his cleanup man. He said no survivors, just proof. Ethan crouched beside Lara. Proof, the man swallowed. Photos. He wanted your badge and your body on record. His eyes darted nervously to Victor's still form. He said once he had that, the DEA would close the case for good. Lara's face hardened. Ethan saw the moment the betrayal sank in, the mixture of fury and disbelief, the kind of wound that cuts deeper than bullets. He used the badge to silence anyone who questioned him, she whispered. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Then we use that against him. They tied the men to the support beam, left them secured. Ethan cleaned the cut on his arm while Lara rechecked their weapons. Shadow lay nearby, eyes on the door, his body rigid but calm. The perfect sentinel. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and thin. It wasn't the violent storm from before, but a quiet one, slow and deliberate, as if the mountain itself was burying the evidence. Ethan looked toward the horizon, where the dark outline of Hollow Creek Mine waited beyond the pines. He knew what came next. This was no longer about rescue. It was about retribution. He turned to Lara. "At first light, we go to the mine." Lara met his gaze, her voice low and steady. "And this time, we end it." The morning was clear, brittle with frost. The mountain air felt thinner than usual, as if even the forest was holding its breath for what was coming. Ethan Cole walked in front, boots crunching through the ice, the old Winchester rifle slung across his shoulder. His jaw was set, eyes fixed on the ridge ahead, where the black mouth of Hollow Creek Mine cut into the mountain like a wound. Lara Hayes followed close behind, her badge tucked into her jacket pocket. A cracked, scuffed piece of metal that once meant everything and now felt like a scar. Beside her padded Shadow, his fur dusted with snow, moving with the silent grace of a soldier's ghost. They had traveled for hours through terrain that shifted between frozen rock and thick snowdrifts. The trail, once a service road, had long been claimed by the forest. Fallen pines blocked much of it, forcing them to climb over or carve narrow paths with Ethan's hatchet. Lara's breath came out in white puffs, her side aching where the bruises still hadn't faded. But there was no room for pain now. She had one goal: end this. "Almost there," Ethan murmured. His voice was steady, but his eyes scanned constantly. Horizons, trees, sky. The old instincts were awake again, honed by years of missions that had gone bad in places much hotter, but just as deadly. As they neared the mine, the world seemed to quiet. Even the wind died. The entrance loomed ahead, a yawning arch of rusted steel, the remnants of an old mining gate half buried in snow. Faded letters spelled Hollow Creek Extraction Quexers, their paint eaten away by decades of storms. Lara crouched, brushing snow from the ground. Tire tracks, fresh. She met Ethan's gaze. "They've been moving something big," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "Let's find out what." Inside, the mine was colder than the air outside, the walls slick with condensation that froze into glassy frost. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness, glinting off metal beams and old rail carts. The deeper they went, the stronger the smell became. Oil, gasoline, and something chemical beneath it. Shadow growled low, tail stiff, his nose pressed toward a corridor branching left. Ethan gestured for Lara to cover the opposite side as he advanced. They reached a large chamber, its ceiling reinforced with new steel. Too new for an abandoned mine. It was no longer just a cave, it was a warehouse. Stacked against the walls were crates marked with foreign stamps, labels written in Cyrillic and Mandarin, wooden boxes sealed with wax. Ethan pried one open with his knife. Inside, rows of assault rifles wrapped in oil paper. Another crate contained bricks of white powder packed tight. Lara exhaled, voice shaking with fury. "They're smuggling through federal land, using the mine as a hub." Ethan lifted a small folder from a nearby crate, documents wrapped in plastic. He opened it under the beam of his flashlight. Inside were shipping manifests and bank transfer forms, stamped with official seals from Silver Ridge Police Department. The signature at the bottom of several pages made Lara's breath stop cold. "Tom Riker," she whispered. "He signed off on all of it." Before Ethan could answer, Shadow let out a sharp bark, snapping their attention to the far tunnel. A faint rumble echoed. Engines. Headlights pierced the darkness beyond the bend. "Move!" Ethan hissed. He grabbed Lara's arm, pulling her behind a stack of crates just as a convoy rolled in. 3 trucks, headlights muted under red filters. Men jumped out, armed and dressed in winter tactical gear. Their leader, a man with dark hair and a crisp black jacket, shouted orders in a voice that carried over the hum of engines. The man was Marcus Holt, mid-30s, sharp-featured with narrow eyes and a trimmed beard. Once a SWAT captain under Riker, he had left after a scandal hushed out of the press. He carried himself like a man who believed the law had simply moved beneath him. There was a burn scar on the right side of his neck, an old injury from a botched raid years ago. Since then, his trust in rules had evaporated. Only profit mattered. "Unload everything," Marcus barked. "We're ahead of schedule. The boss wants it cleared before nightfall." Ethan and Lara stayed perfectly still, breaths shallow. From their hiding spot, they could see the men setting up fuel drums near the crates, preparing for transport. Marcus lit a cigarette, the orange flare illuminating the cruelty carved into his face. "We take what we can carry," he said. "Torch the rest. No evidence, no problem." Ethan's jaw tightened. If those drums went up, everything inside, including the proof against Riker, would vanish. He leaned toward Lara. "We can't let them burn it." Lara nodded. "We take the documents and get out. Quietly." They began to move, slow and silent. But as they crept along the shadows, one of the guards turned suddenly. His flashlight beam swept across the chamber and caught a flash of movement. "Hey!" he shouted, raising his rifle. The mine erupted into chaos. Bullets cracked, ricocheting off metal beams. Ethan shoved Lara down behind a cart and fired back, his old SEAL precision returning like muscle memory. Shadow lunged forward, knocking one gunman off balance and dragging him into the dark. Lara fired 2 controlled shots, taking another in the shoulder. Marcus shouted, "Kill them both!" Ethan fired at the fuel drum near the trucks, hoping to create cover, not destruction. But one bullet struck the rim too close. The pressurized vapors caught instantly. A roar of flame burst outward, throwing sparks and smoke through the chamber. "Run!" he yelled. They sprinted toward a maintenance tunnel, heat licking their backs. Shadow bounded ahead, barking frantically. Fire raced along the oil lines, consuming crates and spilling embers from the ceiling. Lara clutched the folder of evidence to her chest, coughing as smoke filled the air. Marcus, half blind from the explosion, screamed orders behind them. "Don't let them out!" Ethan grabbed Lara's hand and pulled her toward a side shaft, where a narrow drainage pipe curved upward toward the surface. "Here!" he shouted over the roar. "Go!" Lara hesitated. "It's too small." "Move!" She crawled into the pipe, Shadow squeezing in behind her, nails scraping metal. Ethan followed last, dragging himself through as flames consumed the tunnel below. The heat burned against his back. The air turned to steam. Then, finally, cold. They burst out onto the snowy slope outside, coughing, covered in soot. Behind them, the entrance to the mine exploded in a plume of black smoke and orange fire. The mountain groaned like it was alive, rocks collapsing inward. Lara fell to her knees, clutching Shadow's collar, gasping for breath. Ethan stood behind her, chest heaving, eyes locked on the burning horizon. The mine was gone, buried under its own corruption. But in Lara's arms, the folder survived. She looked up at Ethan, snow melting against her lashes. "We have proof," she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. His face was streaked with ash, his expression grim but steady. "Then we use it." Behind them, the flames continued to rise, painting the snow crimson. The ghosts of Hollow Creek burned with them, but the truth, at last, had survived. The next day dawned gray, heavy with the scent of thawing snow and smoke, still lingering from the fire at Hollow Creek. Ethan Cole sat at the small wooden table inside the cabin, the battered folder lying open before him. Its edges were singed, but the papers inside, bank transfers, shipment manifests, signatures, were intact. Across from him, Lara Hayes sat with a mug of untouched coffee, staring into the flames. She hadn't spoken much since the explosion. Her face was pale from exhaustion, but her eyes burned with a resolve that not even betrayal could dull. Shadow lay beside her chair, his thick coat matted with soot, his head resting on her boot. He slept lightly, ears twitching at every sound, ever vigilant, as if he knew the war wasn't over yet. Ethan reached for the satellite phone, resting beside the folder. Its scratched casing bore the marks of years in service, much like him. He hesitated before pressing the call code burned into his memory. A direct line to Noah Briggs, his former SEAL teammate, and now a tactical advisor for the DEA's Western Division. Noah was a man carved out of the same steel as Ethan, but where Ethan carried his pain in silence, Noah masked his with sarcasm and caffeine. When the connection clicked alive, a familiar voice broke the static. "Cole? Jesus, man, it's been 3 years. Please tell me you're not calling to ask for bail money." "Not this time," Ethan replied dryly. "I've got something bigger." There was a pause. "You sound serious. What's going on?" Ethan's tone dropped. "Evidence of a trafficking network using federal land as a hub. Arms, drugs, money. The head of Silver Ridge PD is running it." A whistle came through the line. "Riker? That bastard's been on our radar. You have proof?" Ethan looked at the folder, then at Lara, who met his gaze with a small nod. "Yeah, and witnesses." "Where are you?" "Cabin north of Silver Ridge, off Route 14. It's not safe to stay long." "I'll send a team," Noah said. "Hold tight, Cole. You just opened a door a lot of people have been trying to kick down for years." The line went dead. Ethan set the phone down. Lara broke the silence. "You trust him?" "I do," Ethan said simply. "We've seen each other's worst days." By afternoon, a black SUV wound its way up the snow-laden trail. From inside stepped 3 agents in heavy winter jackets, followed by Noah Briggs himself. He was tall, powerfully built, with sun-weathered skin and close-cropped dark hair threaded with gray. His beard was trimmed, his expression equal parts stern and amused. A faint scar crossed his chin, a souvenir from a mission in Libya where he and Ethan had barely made it out alive. He took one look at Ethan and smirked. "Still hiding in the woods, huh? Guess some habits don't die." Ethan clasped his hand. "Good to see you too." Then Noah's gaze shifted to Lara. "You must be Officer Hayes. Heard your name over the wire. The department's been pretending you're dead." Lara straightened. "That's their mistake." Noah's grin faded, replaced by the quiet authority of a man used to dealing with broken systems. "Then let's fix it." Inside the cabin, Noah spread the documents across the table while his agents photographed every page. "Riker's been laundering money through offshore accounts under dummy construction permits," he explained. "If we trace these signatures, we can connect him to every major shipment in the region. This is enough to fry him twice over." Lara watched, her hands clenched. "He killed my partner, framed me, and he almost got away with it." Noah looked up, his expression softening. "Not anymore." By nightfall, they had everything secured. One of the agents, Agent Miller, a younger man with sharp features and an eager confidence, stepped forward. "We're set, sir. Warrants are ready. Local PD's under surveillance." "Good," Noah said. "We move before sunrise. If Riker's half as smart as I think, he's already trying to cover his tracks." He turned to Ethan. "You coming with us?" Ethan hesitated, glancing toward the window where the storm clouds were rolling back in. "I've had my share of raids, Noah." Noah's grin returned faintly. "You always say that before walking straight into one." Ethan exhaled, then checked the magazine of his rifle. "Fine. But I'm not wearing a vest with your logo. Dawn came slow and gray. The convoy of DEA vehicles slid through Silver Ridge like ghosts. The town still slept under a thin blanket of snow, unaware that its own police chief was about to fall. At headquarters, Tom Riker sat in his office surrounded by screens, bank logs, encrypted files, all flashing with the same red warning. Data deletion failed. His hands trembled as he typed commands faster. Sweat beaded his brow despite the cold air. Riker was in his 50s, tall and broad, with once handsome features hardened by years of manipulation. His silver hair was slicked back, his blue eyes glassy from too many sleepless nights and too many secrets. To the public, he was the face of order. Behind closed doors, he was the architect of rot. The door burst open. Noah's team flooded in. "Tom Riker," Noah barked, raising his badge. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and first-degree murder." Riker looked up, eyes cold. "You don't know what you're doing, Agent." Ethan stepped from behind Noah, his voice calm but cutting. "Oh, he does, and so do I." Recognition flickered across Riker's face, then hatred. "Cole," he hissed. "I should have known." "Yeah," Ethan said evenly. "You should have." Lara entered last, flanked by 2 agents. She didn't speak at first. She just stared at the man who had ordered her death. When she finally did, her voice was steady but trembling beneath the surface. "You tried to bury me, but I'm still standing." Riker sneered. "You think this changes anything? Another puppet will take my place." "Maybe," she said, "but not today." Noah nodded to his agents. Riker was cuffed, his protests drowned by the click of steel. Hours later, news broke across every major outlet. Silver Ridge police chief arrested in massive DEA operation. The small town's illusion of peace shattered, replaced by the grim truth of what had festered beneath it. In the following weeks, Lara was reinstated, her name cleared. She stood in front of the department she once served, now under new leadership, and received a Medal of Valor. Cameras flashed. Applause filled the room. But the look on her face was quiet. Grateful, yes, but far from triumphant. After the ceremony, she found Ethan waiting outside by his truck. He wore a simple gray jacket, hands in his pockets, eyes lost somewhere beyond the mountains. "They offered me a position," he said when she approached. "Tactical consultant, field work." "Are you taking it?" He shook his head. "No, I've done enough fighting. I just want peace now." Lara smiled softly and handed him a small box. Inside lay a red wool scarf, neatly folded. "Then take this," she said. "If one day peace gets too cold, come find me." Ethan looked at her, the faintest hint of warmth in his eyes. "Maybe I will." As she walked away with Shadow trotting beside her, the wind carried a whisper of pine and something like hope. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the war inside him quiet, just a little. The snow had begun to surrender to spring. In the high ridges of silver pine, sunlight now pierced the melting canopy, trickling down the slopes in silver rivulets. The cabin, once buried under a white shroud, stood alone on a hill surrounded by dark soil and patches of stubborn ice that still refused to die. Inside, Ethan Cole moved slowly through the morning, his every motion deliberate, unhurried. The months had changed him, not in the lines of his face or the steady strength of his frame, but in the quiet that followed him like a shadow made of peace instead of guilt. He had rebuilt the cabin's porch, replaced the splintered door from that night of violence, and repaired the cracked window glass with his own hands. He hunted, fished, read old books he hadn't opened in years. Sometimes he spoke aloud without realizing, to the fire, to the mountains, to the silence. But often his voice would drift toward memory. A woman's voice, firm but warm, and a dog's low bark that had once filled this lonely place with life. That morning, he brewed coffee and stepped outside with the steaming cup. The forest smelled alive again, wet earth, pine, and faint sweetness from blooming wildflowers that sprouted where snow had receded. A robin landed on the wooden rail, tilting its head toward him. Ethan smiled faintly. "You're back early this year," he murmured. Then he heard it, the distant hum of an engine. Faint at first, like a rumor carried by the wind, but growing clearer with every second. His grip tightened around the cup. Few vehicles ever came this high. He set it down and stepped off the porch, squinting toward the trail winding up from the valley. A dark SUV emerged between the pines, wheels crunching over thawing gravel. When it stopped near the clearing, the driver's door opened, and she stepped out. Lara Hayes looked different now. No longer the uniformed officer bound by a badge and duty, but a woman finally breathing for herself. She wore a long wool coat of deep forest green that matched her eyes, and her hair, once tied tight for function, now fell freely in loose chestnut waves down her shoulders. The wind caught a few strands, lifting them across her face, and she brushed them aside with a smile that reached her eyes. Her posture still bore the precision of training, but her expression carried something gentler, an ease born of healing. Shadow leapt from the passenger side next, bounding through the slush toward Ethan. The German shepherd had grown fuller, his winter coat thick and shining, a small scar still visible near his flank, a reminder of what they had all survived. He barked once, sharply, then trotted up, tail wagging, pressing his head against Ethan's knee. Ethan knelt to rub his neck. "Hey, soldier," he said softly. "Still keeping her out of trouble?" Shadow huffed, as if answering yes, then settled by Ethan's feet, sighing contentedly. Lara approached, her boots leaving neat prints in the soft ground. "You fixed the porch," she said, looking around. "I thought you'd leave this place." Ethan straightened, smiling faintly. "I tried, but the mountains kept me." She nodded, glancing at the landscape that had once been their battlefield. "I can see why." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled with all the words they didn't need to say. Finally, Lara reached into her coat and pulled out a small velvet box. "The DEA wanted me to deliver this personally," she said. "They said it was a long time coming." Ethan opened the box. Inside lay a silver medal of civil valor, engraved with his name. It gleamed softly in the morning light. He stared at it for a long time, thumb tracing its edge. "I didn't save anyone from medals," he said quietly. "I know," Lara replied. "That's why you deserve it." He closed the box and handed it back. "Keep it. You were the one who went into the fire." She shook her head. "You pulled me out of it." They stood there, two survivors of different wars, both learning how to live after the gunfire stopped. Lara looked toward the horizon. After Riker's arrest, the department rebuilt the task force. They offered me a lead position. I took it, for now. But I think I'm done chasing ghosts. Ethan smiled faintly. "You'll miss it." "Maybe," she admitted. "But there's more to life than duty. Took me long enough to see that." She reached into her coat again and pulled out something red, a hand-knitted scarf, soft and slightly uneven, the kind made by hands unpracticed but sincere. She held it out to him. "I made this," she said with a laugh that was part embarrassment, part pride. "Don't laugh. It took me weeks." Ethan took it, fingers brushing hers. The wool was warm despite the cold air, and he felt something loosen in his chest. "You remembered." "I promised," Lara said quietly. "If you ever get cold, you know where to find me." He looked at her. Really looked. At the curve of her smile, the light in her eyes that the world hadn't managed to steal. "You sure you want someone like me finding you?" he asked softly. Her gaze didn't waver. "You already did." For a long moment, the world seemed to hold still. The wind stirred the treetops. Sunlight spilled over the ridge like gold. Then she stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Shadow, sensing the peace between them, circled once before lying down near the porch, head on his paws, watching them with quiet approval. Ethan's eyes drifted toward the distant peaks, still capped with snow. "Funny," he said. "All those years I thought the cold was what kept me alive. Turns out it was waiting for spring." Lara leaned against his shoulder. "Then let's not waste it." They sat on the porch as the day unfolded. The sound of meltwater trickling down from the hills. The occasional bird's call breaking the quiet. Time seemed to slow, not from stillness, but from contentment. As the sun began to lower, the snow that remained shimmered in soft gold light. Lara rested her head against Ethan's shoulder, and he let his hand drift to hers, fingers intertwining naturally. Shadow lifted his head, watching them with calm eyes, before sighing again and settling back down. In that silence, there was no need for promises or words. The war, the fire, the betrayal, all of it had been washed away by the thaw. Ethan looked out at the horizon where winter met spring. "You know," he murmured, "for the first time, I don't feel like running anymore." Lara smiled without opening her eyes. "Then you're finally home." Above them, a lone eagle cut across the sky, its cry echoing over the valley like a benediction. The snow, once a symbol of cold and solitude, now glittered like light reborn. And as the last of winter melted away, two hearts, once frozen by war and loss, found warmth again beneath the quiet sky of silver pine. Sometimes the miracles we search for are not thunder from heaven or blinding light on a lonely road. They are quiet resurrections of the heart. In Ethan's solitude, God sent two lost souls to his doorstep, and through saving them, he found his own salvation. The story reminds us that no matter how heavy the snow, grace can still melt its way into our lives. Miracles do not always arrive as angels with wings. They may come as someone knocking when we least expect, or as a small act of courage when fear has taken root. In every ordinary day, we are given a chance to be the hands of God for someone else. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need light today. Leave a comment. Tell us how faith has shown up in your life, and subscribe for more stories that remind us that goodness still walks this earth. May God bless you, keep you safe, and may His grace guide your path through every storm.